Dauphin Island Sea Lab. My name is Mendel Graver. I am one of the educators here at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, and today we are chatting with researchers and educators from across the northern Gulf of Mexico about climate. This year's theme for the Mississippi Coastal Research and Extension Center, and Sonia works with the PLACE SLR, which is the program for local adaptations to climate effects and sea level rise. So Sonia is going to chat with us this morning about sea level rise and some of the ways that we can come to understand sea level rise better and how we can better adapt to sea level rise as individuals and as communities, and use some of the resources that are created by scientists and shared with the PLACE network to give folks access to these resources.
So my name is Sonia. I am with PLACE Sea Level Rise, as well at the Mississippi State University Coastal Research and Extension Center. And I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change, a little bit about sea level rise, to kind of build off of what you heard from Sarah and Renee earlier. So from Renee, you got into the two ways that sea level rise is occurring, and then some solutions. And so I want to talk about what is kind of driving those two changes for sea level rise. So what's making that ice melt, what's making the water get hotter, and talk about some activities that you can do at home or in your classroom to kind of make these connections a little bit more hands-on. And so the first activity that I'm going to talk about is these Connect-It cards. So this is a game that is developed from the New England Aquarium, and it has these bright, colorful cards to make connections for climate change and what's happening. So if you come in closer in the video, so the first start sets us off as what's happening. And so I'll read through these cards. When we burn fossil fuels like coal and gas, we pump carbon dioxide, CO2, into the atmosphere. And then as carbon dioxide, CO2 builds up, it creates a blanket around the Earth. And you can see our cartoon Earth is getting a blanket of carbon dioxide molecules around it. And then this thick blanket around Earth traps heat. So when we have too much of the CO2 on our atmosphere, it gets really hot and our Earth gets a little bit overheated. And then this trapped heat warms up our oceans, which has impacts for the animals and the ecosystems that live there, but then continues on and influences things like sea level rise, which is going to affect everybody who lives along the coast or relies on things from the coast, like shipping or seafood, so really everyone. And so with these cards, these Connect-It cards, this is the heat trapping blanket metaphor. And as we're having more carbon dioxide that's building up this blanket, it's going to warm up our atmosphere, which will melt our land ice, and it also warms up our ocean, which leads to thermal expansion of water. And so Renee talked about some of the great adaptations to sea level rise, but there are some other individual actions that we can do to reduce our carbon emissions, which will help reduce the further down in the chain impacts of sea level rise. So with the cards, I'm going to push the heat trapping blanket metaphor kind of on the top here. But then we have different individual actions that we can take to reduce our carbon. I'm going to take these apart. And so these cards are available online. They're called the Connect-It cards. You can download them and print them off to be able to do in a classroom or at home. And each of the cards, they have different series and they ask a question. So I'm going to kind of set up the questions and then we'll kind of mix match them to see what some of the actions are. So we have this yellow is, how does eating locally help ocean animals? We also have the question, how does composting help ocean animals? How does planting trees help ocean animals? How does public transportation help ocean animals? And the last question is, how does a reusable water bottle help ocean animals? And so these might be things that you're doing or that you're going to learn about. But all of these actions are things that will help ocean animals, but they're not even in the ocean. So we can have an impact on our animals and our oceans, even if we're not directly on the coast. But here in coastal Mississippi and coastal Alabama, what we're going to do close or far away, we're all surrounded by the ocean. So with the game, there are different cards, just like the order of our heat trapping blanket, and we're going to have to match them up to see what the answer is, what each of the steps are. And they're going to go one by one. So I'm going to start down here with the green for how does planting trees help ocean animals. And I'm going to just spread them out to see if I can figure out the order. This one that says less warming keeps our ocean temperatures cool and stable seems like it might be the end. So I'm going to move it here. But let's see. Trees are carbon sinks. So that might be the first one. And it has a picture of trees with hungry mouths and some carbon dioxide molecules. And trees are carbon sinks, which means they can absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means less warming. And the Earth says, I'm so cool. And less warming keeps ocean temperatures cool and stable. So planting trees helps ocean animals because those trees are going to absorb, kind of eat up the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere around them. Those trees are going to use that to grow, and it means that the Earth stays more stable and the oceans get warmed up less. Our next question is, how does composting help ocean animals? And if you're in the comments, let me know if you compost at home. I've got a compost bin. I have one that's a tumbler, as well as one that I just repurposed an old like Rubbermaid container so I can put all my yard scraps and kitchen scraps in. So let's see how composting helps. I'm going to spread these out. And it looks like, again, this one will probably be at the end, but composting, adding compost to the soil makes it healthy and strong. And healthy soil needs fewer pesticides. Since pesticides are made from fossil fuels, this means fewer fossil fuels are used. When fewer fossil fuels are burned, less carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere. And less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means less warming. And less warming keeps our ocean temperatures cool and stable. So just from composting in your yard, you are able to help reduce carbon emissions and have a healthy garden and eating locally, which goes into our next question for how does eating locally help ocean animals? And let's see, when your food is grown close to where you live, fewer fossil fuels are burned to get it to your plate. And this apple might go first. When you buy and eat from local farms and stores, your food doesn't have to travel as far. When your food is grown close to where you live, fewer fossil fuels are burned to get it to your plate. When fewer fossil fuels are burned, less CO2 is emitted into the atmosphere. Less CO2 in the atmosphere means less warming, and less warming keeps our ocean temperatures cool and stable. So we've made it through most of these questions, and we'll continue with how does public transportation help ocean animals? And I know around here we don't have a ton of public transportation options, but if you're traveling and you have the opportunity to carpool with somebody, or you're going with your family and you have your whole car full versus taking multiple different vehicles, these are all ways that we can reduce how many different cars are out there traveling. And so we'll spread these cards out. When more people use the bus or train, fewer cars are on the road. When fewer cars are on the road, they burn fewer fossil fuels. When fewer fossil fuels are burned, less carbon dioxide is emitted to the atmosphere. Less CO2 in the atmosphere means less warming, and less warming keeps our ocean temperatures cool and stable. And then our last question is, how does a reusable water bottle help ocean animals? And if you use a reusable water bottle, hit the like button so we can see if you're already doing this, and you can see your impact. So with these cards, when you reuse things, you are helping lower the demand for disposable stuff like plastic. Making less stuff like plastic means that fewer fossil fuels are burned. When fewer fossil fuels are burned, less carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere. Less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means less warming, and less warming keeps our ocean temperatures cool and stable. So just by reusing something like a water bottle, a reusable travel mug for coffee or tea, a bag that you bring to pick up your groceries instead of a paper or plastic bag, all of that helps reduce our carbon emissions, which helps keep our ocean temperatures cool and stable, which means that we're not going to have as huge of an impact as sea level rise as we could potentially have. So every action that we do as an individual or as a community builds up, and we can choose if those actions are going to reduce our impact and then make it easier for us to live on the coast, and as we're dealing. Though all of these actions are individual, when we have lots of individuals come together, we can have even bigger change. So if you're in a community and when you're talking to your neighbors about this, maybe you can set up something like recycling in your town, or you could have a clothing swap or a swap so that the things that you don't need anymore can go to a home with your neighbors. That would have a bigger impact. Or talking with your neighbors and working with elected officials so that you can have policies in place so that you are reducing your carbon emissions on a bigger scale in your town, in your city, in your state, and in the whole country. Another great resource for talking about our carbon emissions is the resource drawdown. And so this is the book, but there's also a website where you can go and look at different solutions. And some of them, I'm gonna just flip to some tabs, are looking at energy and going towards food, having more plants in your diet, swapping out one day a week instead of choosing a meat, choosing a plant version. So that's just one day, but that has a pretty big impact. And using LED light, having more sustainable options, having buildings that are heated, or having smart thermostats so that you're using energy to heat or cool your home that's not too demanding on the system. Having insulation so you need less. Then electric vehicles. And where is a cool one? Recycling, paper, saving water. All of these options help, and they can be at local levels and they can be at community levels. And so Drawdown has a great resource. Are there any questions or comments from people who are doing actions like
you mentioned a lot of different ways that individuals can do their part to reduce demands on our on the planet. So a lot of those are very easy, and so it is relatively easy to incorporate a number of those. One of the things that I always like to add is that we could just consider putting fewer demands on resources as individuals. So just consider whether you really need those things that you want. Maybe we can do with less, and that would result in less demand on our resources. And to sort of bring this into a broader context, you are talking about like the carbon emissions, and a lot of us are familiar with the greenhouse effect or greenhouse gases. And another analogy that may be something that's more familiar, closer to home, would be that this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, these greenhouse gases, act sort of like the glass in a car or a vehicle. So those of us who live on the Gulf Coast are familiar with the effect of our vehicles heating up to extreme temperatures on hot summer days. So the greenhouse gases will allow radiation from the sun to penetrate, to go in, but then the wavelength of that radiation change when they hit the earth. And so it is, when it's reflected back, it has been trapped by our atmosphere, by those greenhouse gases. So it has that effect similar to a car's vehicle. And you had also mentioned how our carbon, I think you referred to it as a carbon sink. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so, and some of the things that's like plants or trees are carbon sinks. So how trees grow and through photosynthesis, they need carbon dioxide. And if we think about us, when we're doing respiration, we breathe in oxygen and then breathe out carbon dioxide. Trees kind of do the reverse of that, where they're breathing in that carbon dioxide and they're breathing out oxygen. And so plants that photosynthesize, they need carbon dioxide and they take it in, and that's how they're growing. They're going to break down the carbon from the oxygen so that they're able to take that carbon and make it part of their matter, and so they get big. And so plants, trees or grasses, they're going to be absorbing that. So as long as the trees are growing or the plants are growing, they're pulling carbon dioxide and they're storing it in their tissue. So like a sink, a carbon sink is just like a place that's really holding this together. So you have forests with a lot of trees, they're big carbon sinks. And the great thing about the ocean is all of the phytoplankton, all of the tiny little photos are in the ocean. They're also carbon sinks. And so they're able to take that carbon and hold it in a place so it's not the atmosphere. Because like this heat trapping blanket, we need carbon dioxide. We need these greenhouse gases. That's what makes Earth livable. But the problem is when it becomes too thick. So, sometimes it's nice to have a blanket on, but if you put like 40 blankets on top of you, you might feel a little bit too hot and it's not nice anymore. So it's all about balance, where we do need some carbon dioxide. We do need some of it in the atmosphere. That's what lets us have a habitable Earth, but we don't need too much.